Welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
We are back for the third part of Candy and Betty. We
want to know how it ends.
Yes, we made it all the way up to the trial. So that is where we're going to start today.
I can't wait to hear what happens next. I've been thinking about this since we did our last recording.
Yay, I'm so excited. Well, because this walks you through it. It's so good. All right, should we dive in?
Let's do it.
Yes.
On the morning of the trial, Candy Montgomery stepped inside the courthouse. She was nervous, terrified, really. Her best friend Sherry was there to support her, standing close, offering reassurance. Candy had dressed carefully, muted colors, a skirt that fell below her knees. The final touch, she added a white shawl draped over her shoulders. She needed to look frail, innocent, harmless, because today her life was on the line. Meanwhile, Don Crowder was feeling something else entirely. As he drove up to the courthouse, a rush of adrenaline surged through him. This was it. The battle he had been preparing for. And Don, he was ready to fight. First came jury selection. It moved fast. Within just a few hours, 32 jurors were eliminated. By the afternoon, the process had narrowed even more. Some surprises remained, though. 2 potential jurors had connections to Don. A clear conflict. Yet, when questioned, both insisted they could be fair and impartial.
When you say they had a connection, do you know what kind of connection? Was that personal? They were friends of his?
One of them had actually used him as a lawyer.
Okay.
And he had coached one of the other one's son's sports team.
Okay.
He was a football star in high school, and he coached for his own son and then for other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they were both positive connections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Another juror hesitated over the issue of circumstantial evidence, unsure if she could convict based on it. All 3 were selected.
Oh,
Don was surprised, but he didn't fight it.
That's really interesting.
It's interesting the prosecutor didn't
Yeah,
kill them off.
Exactly.
Mhm.
especially if he's like a friend of theirs.
Yeah,
That seems like a definite conflict of interest.
I'm surprised the judge even let it go, actually. Next up, Don did something bold. He stood in front of the 62 remaining jurors. He looked them in the eyes, and he told them the truth. Candy Montgomery killed Betty Gore. The room went silent, a stunned silence. One woman's face paled. Another woman started to cry. Don said she killed her with an axe, and she did it in self-defense. The prosecutor, up until this point, did not know that they were using self-defense.
Oh, wow.
I bet that was quite the shock.
He was not
Yeah.
prepared to take on that, right?
Yeah.
Well, and how do you refute that? No one else was there. No one else saw it.
Right.
Like, that's going to be a definite uphill battle for him.
Well, yes, unless you've got evidence on your side.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm also surprised that they did it before the trial even starts, because I feel like that almost could have caught them off guard once the trial started and would have given them an upper hand. But now they have a little bit of time to prepare before the trial.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the trial's starting the next day.
So not
they
much.
don't have a lot of time. And also, Don wanted to test that out on the jurors.
Yeah.
And see how they reacted and what their response would be, right?
Yeah.
Once Don said that, the weight of his words settled in. Candy wasn't denying it. They weren't arguing that someone else had done it. She admitted it. And now it was all about proving why. Don continued, Candy will take the stand. She will testify. Then he laid out the rules of self-defense, what the law said, and what the jury would need to consider. Then he took it one step further. Let's talk about affairs. That was it, the breaking point. 2 women raised their hands. I can't do this, one of them said, shaking her head. The other agreed it was too much, and they were excused. In the end, the jury was set. 9 women, 3 men. And that was not good news for Candy, because women, they were always harder on other women, especially in murder trials. 2 of the jurors had spouses who worked with Pat Montgomery. 2 had ties to Rockwell Engineering, where Alan Gore worked, and yet they had been approved. This jury wasn't random. They were Candy's peers. They were white, upper middle class, people who looked like her, lived like her, and now they were the only ones who could decide her fate.
That would be so much like pressure. Like that would be so hard to be on a jury for a murder trial.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I could do it.
I know. I don't know if I could either. I kind of would like to, though.
I think it would be interesting, but a lot of power to hold someone else's fate in your hands.
That's true. I wouldn't like that. And especially like having to decide death row or not.
Yeah.
That would be really tough.
Yeah.
Bob Pomeroy, who was Betty's dad, sat in stunned disbelief. Self-defense? Candy Montgomery was claiming self-defense? That was the strategy? Bob couldn't wrap his head around it. He had spent months grieving his daughter, Betty Gore, trying to understand how and why this had happened. And through it all, Alan Gore had been indifferent, almost disconnected. Over the summer, while Betty's family had been mourning, Alan kept bringing up the Montgomerys. Not about Candy's guilt or even innocence, not about justice for Betty, but about money, how much the Montgomerys were losing, how hard this had been for them. Finally, Bob snapped. I don't care about that at all if she murdered Betty. It was the only thing that mattered. The trial was a full-blown media circus. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. This wasn't just a court case, it was a spectacle. Betty's father, Bob, was stunned by the circus in front of him. He had no idea how to make it through the mess to get into the courtroom. An officer pulled him aside, showed him a side door, and said, "Come here to me every day, and I'll let you in." Later, Bob would reflect on that small kindness. That was the first and last time I ever felt any kindness from the judicial system, because what was about to unfold didn't feel like justice. It felt like a game. Tuesday, before the trial officially began, the courtroom was buzzing. Then Judge Ryan made an announcement. Dawn Crowder, Candy's fiery, aggressive attorney, was being held in contempt of court. For what? Talking to a news outlet. They had let the news in while they were doing jury selection, so Dawn insisted that he thought the gag order had been lifted, but the judge said that it hadn't. So his punishment, a $100 fine and 24 hours in jail.
Oh, wow.
Not now, of course, after the trial was over. Dawn was outraged. This felt like a political move and an attempt to put him in his place before the trial even began. But if they thought this would shake him, they didn't know Dawn Crowder. Because this wasn't just a case to him anymore. This was war. The prosecution began their case. Their first witness, Alan Gore. He walked to the stand, sat down, and gave nothing. Flat, quiet, no emotion. The jury didn't like him, and that was bad news for the prosecution. They walked him through his phone call to Candy the night Betty was murdered. How did she sound? They asked. She was very upset, Alan said, shocked. Then came the big moment. Tell us about your affair with Candy Montgomery. Alan stiffened, but he answered. Then the prosecution pushed further. And the breakup, how did that go? Alan's response? It was mutual. No hesitation, no elaboration, just 3 words. Flat and unemotional. The jury's dislike for Alan was growing. Then Dawn Crowder took over, and his approach was completely different. He didn't go straight for the affair. Instead, he asked small, simple questions. How tall was Betty? I don't know. What did she weigh? Alan didn't know. Dawn let that sit for a moment, then he switched topics. Let's talk about marriage resolution. For minutes, Dawn kept Alan locked in discussions about marriage counseling. Then, did Betty and Candy get along? Alan said yes. Do you think Betty was depressed? Slowly, Alan opened up. Yes, Betty had been deeply depressed. It wasn't a secret, and the jury, they hung on those words. Then, Dawn took a different route. He brought up the newspaper on the table. The Shining. It was there, open, when Betty was found murdered. A story about rage and violence, a brutal axe murder. The imagery was powerful. Then Dawn had Alan confirm something critical. Candy had never been in your garage, correct? Correct. And she had never seen the axe before? Correct. The message was clear. Candy didn't bring the axe. She didn't plan to use it. But the jury would have to decide, was that enough to justify what happened next? Wednesday morning, day 2 of the trial, Candy Montgomery had formed an opinion about the prosecutor, Tom O'Connell. She liked him. She wasn't afraid of him. She didn't find him threatening. And for someone accused of hacking her friend to death with an axe, that was a bold reaction.
Yeah.
Then came the most painful testimony of the trial, the discovery of Betty Gore's body, how she had been left for hours before anyone knew she was dead, how Bethany Gore, just a baby, had been left alone in her crib for 13 hours, crying, hungry, and abandoned.
So sad.
So sad. In the courtroom, the horror of that settled in. For some, it seemed too much to bear. Then came the witnesses from church. 3 women took the stand. All 3 had seen Candy before and after the murder. All 3 said she seemed normal. All 3 swore she was wearing the same clothes the entire time. And all 3 found it inconceivable that she could have murdered Betty Gore. The problem for the prosecution, these were their witnesses. Everything they said, that helped the defense. At lunchtime, no one left the courtroom, not one person, because no one wanted to lose their seat. Judge Ryan eventually had to ban food inside. Otherwise, the courtroom would have turned into a picnic. This trial seemed like it was no longer just a murder case. It was entertainment.
You said in the last episode that they weren't able to move to a different county for the trial, right? So This is like all of their friends and family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And everyone that's been reading about it for months.
Yeah, and everybody who lives in that same community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure they're all very interested to know what's going on.
And you know what's interesting? A lot of the cases that we cover, the trial starts years after what happened. This is starting in October, and it happened June 13th. It was fast.
That is fast.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my point is that they've been seeing it nonstop.
Yeah.
And it hasn't had time to
settle.
Yeah, exactly. That afternoon, the prosecution tried to turn the focus back to the evidence. They discussed the fingernail found at the crime scene, which was a piece of critical forensic evidence. But then it came out the fingernail had been passed around by multiple people before it was officially logged into evidence. It was compromised and now basically useless. Next up came the crime scene photos, and the forensics expert took the stand explaining what they had seen. And by now, all the holes in this investigation were piling up. Thursday was the prosecution's last day. By Thursday morning, the trial was more of a circus than it had been earlier in the week. Why? A big rumor had spread. The defense was planning to put Candy Montgomery on the stand first. People wanted to see it. They wanted to hear her speak in person. But first, the prosecution had to finish their case. They called Dr. Stone, the crime scene analyst. Dawn had already met with him, and Dawn knew exactly what he was going to say. Stone described the scene as chaotic. It wasn't clean. It wasn't calculated. It was a mess. So when Dawn cross-examined him, he leaned into that. Would you say this was a careless crime? Yes. Not planned at all. Correct. Could this have happened in self-defense? Dr. Stone paused, then finally said, "It's possible." And just like that, the prosecution's own expert had planted doubt. After lunch, the medical examiner took the stand. His job was to list every single wound on Betty Gore's body, and he did, in excruciating detail, one after another. Each cut, each gash, each blow from the axe. Betty's father, Bob, sat in the courtroom listening. 41 chop wounds. The randomness of the blows, the brutality of it, he felt sick. He almost left because hearing what had been done to Betty was more than he could take.
That would be so hard.
That would be horrible, especially if they were showing the pictures that they took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be the hardest part sitting in that trial
Agreed.
for her family.
I think her dad was the only one that came. I think it was too much for her mom. Yeah.
It's hard for anybody.
Even like Alan.
Well, Alan's kind of flat affect, so.
He really is. And actually that's, never explained. I cannot find anywhere why he was just so
Yeah,
like unfeeling. I don't know.
it's really interesting.
Maybe that's part of why Betty was depressed.
Possibly.
Could be.
Or
I'm sure there was more to
vice
it. but
versa. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
That's true.
I don't know. Which is horrible
Affected
to
each
say.
other. Yeah.
Yeah. Then Don Crowder stood for cross-examination. He asked the medical examiner one critical question. Is there anything about these wounds that would rule out self-defense? The ME thought for a moment, then he shook his head. No, sir. That was all Don needed. And with that, the prosecution rested.
Didn't sound like the prosecution was very well prepared for this.
Mm-mm.
And none of their witnesses
Were helpful.
Right.
Nothing like, I don't know, nothing made their point.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Not.
Just like,
Well,
here it is.
and I feel like they should fight that a little bit more because while there might not have been anything to say that it wasn't self-defense, I mean, 41, like
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
Excessive.
Yes.
Yes.
And I don't know if they brought in a doctor about Candy, but I mean, I know she had gone because she had a lot of bruises and stuff like that. Were they able to see if she had any defensive wounds on her?
Didn't she have a cut wound on her foot?
Her foot and her forehead. And then she did have a lot of bruises. I think that they maybe asked about it, but they didn't push to go through each of those. The defense will, but
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, also, the prosecution has the harder job and has to push harder because they have to make every single one of those jurors believe without a doubt that it was Candy. Because
Mhm.
even if a couple people vote no, you have to have a unanimous vote, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
Either way, it has to be unanimous.
Well, if it
Mm.
ends in acquittal, then they
Yeah.
can either try the case again or.
yeah.
I guess that's true.
Mhm.
But yeah, the defense just needs to plant doubt in their mind or like
Mhm.
say like, oh, it could have been, we don't know. And that's
And-
all they have to do. The prosecution really has to
Well,
go for it.
and they were probably prepared to paint her as the murderer.
Yeah.
Which they already said she did it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Yeah.
maybe they just weren't prepared to argue that it wasn't self-defense.
Yeah, go that hard on it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And their expert witnesses can't say without a doubt that it
That
wasn't.
Mhm.
And they can't get more, than that.
Yep.
Yeah.
The prosecution did believe that they had proven their case.
Oh.
They proved that Candy had killed Betty Gore. She had shown up. They knew she was there, and they believed that she had shown no remorse. Plus, the brutality of the crime spoke for itself. But had they proven murder, or had they left the door open for self-defense? Because now it was Candy's turn.
Well, and maybe they were kind of waiting to cross-examine her
Mm-hmm.
and maybe more cross-examine some of the defense's witnesses to prove their stories wrong. I don't know.
And they do get to bring in a couple more witnesses after the defense to try to disprove what the defense said. So
Maybe that was kind of their plan. I don't
possibly.
know.
Maybe.
Don had tried to delay the start of the defense. He wanted one more night, but you can guess it. The judge denied it. Candy Montgomery would take the stand today. There was a problem that Don knew. Candy had taken a Valium before the medical examiner's testimony. She was feeling so much anxiety, she didn't think she could make it through. So she had taken one at lunch.
She's like,
And now she was not at her sharpest. But it didn't matter because the judge denied it, and it was time for Candy to get on the stand. And the jury was waiting to hear what she had to say. This was Thursday evening, October 23rd, 1980. The courtroom was packed.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was beyond. The trial had already been a spectacle, but now the woman at the center of it all, Candy, was about to take the stand. By the time Candy sat down, the night had already stretched late. It didn't matter. Everyone was watching, waiting, listening as Dawn began questioning her. It was clear something was wrong. Candy's testimony started out as a disaster. She was cold, unfeeling. She spoke in a flat, detached way. Her answers were short, clipped, emotionless. The jury, who had been hanging on every word of this trial, started to pull back. Instead of seeing Candy as a victim, maybe they were starting to see her as a killer. Don could feel it. The entire case was slipping through his fingers, and he had to do something fast. Then Don made a split-second decision. He stopped asking questions. He stopped trying to control the story. Instead, he took Candy straight back to the crime scene. Right there, in front of the jury, he made her relive it. Go back to the utility room. Candy froze. Go back, Candy. Don's voice was calm, steady. What's happening? For the first time, Candy hesitated. Her breath hitched. Then she closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the coldness was gone. The hardness had cracked, and she was no longer in the courtroom. She was back there with Betty, with the axe, and then finally, Candy started to talk.
Was this like the hypnosis thing? Or is he just trying to get her to talk about what happened?
So after hypnosis, now she was remembering it in all the detail from what the doctor had brought out.
Okay.
And so she's not under hypnosis here, but it's just like that flip.
Okay.
That switch flipped, right?
Okay.
On June 13th, Candy Montgomery wasn't expected at Betty's until noon. She had arrived early, and Betty Gore wasn't happy to see her. She had just gotten her baby down for a nap. Her expression was tight, her body rigid. Already, something felt off. Candy got straight to the point. Can Alyssa stay the night? We were going to take her to the movies. She volunteered to take Alyssa to her swimming lesson later in the day. Betty hesitated, then she offered Candy coffee. Candy declined. They sat down, trying to make small talk, but Betty seemed exhausted, tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. As they talked, she reached for something, a small roll of peppermints. Give her these if she puts her head underwater, Betty said. She doesn't like it. They talked about Betty's new puppy. She had 2 Cocker Spaniels. Come see them, Betty said. Candy followed her outside, watching as the puppies played. What are their names, she asked. Princess and Cheeto. For a moment, the tension seemed lifted, but only for a moment. Candy pulled a business card from her pocket, her new wallpaper and painting business. She handed it to Betty with a smile. Betty glanced at it, turning it over. That's cute, she said flatly. The moment passed, Candy stood. I need to be going, she said. Can I grab Alyssa's bathing suit? It's in the utility room, right? Betty didn't move. She just sat there, expression blank. Then, in a voice calm and cold, she asked, Candy, are you having an affair with Alan? Candy froze. No, of course not. She barely got the words out before Betty pressed. But you did, didn't you? Candy's stomach dropped. There was no point in lying. Yes, she admitted, but it was a long time ago. Betty's eyes narrowed. Candy asked, Did Alan tell you? Betty stood up. Wait a minute. Then, without a word, she walked through the utility room and out of sight. For a few seconds, Candy just stood there. Her heart pounded. She wondered, how long had Betty known? Had she been waiting for this moment? Had she been planning for it? Then, Betty reappeared, and this time, she was holding an axe. Candy stood up, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Betty gripped the axe tightly, her knuckles white. I don't want you ever to see him again. Her voice was low, trembling with anger. You can't have him. Candy held up her hands. Betty, it's been over for a long time. I'm not seeing him. I don't want him. Betty didn't respond. She just stood there, the axe in her hands, between them. Heavy, deadly. Candy tried again. Betty, don't be ridiculous. It was a long time ago. Betty exhaled sharply. Well, don't see him ever again. Candy nodded. Maybe we shouldn't keep Alyssa tonight. Betty's grip on the axe tightened, then, no, I don't want to see you. She took a breath. Take Alyssa. And just like that, the decision was made. But what happened next wasn't described by either of them, not really, because in the next few moments, everything would change forever. Candy Montgomery walked into the utility room, her heart still racing, her body calm. She reached for Alyssa's bathing suit just as Betty Gore turned to grab a towel. Behind her, Betty's voice came. Don't forget the peppermints. The tone was different now, softer. Candy turned back as Betty handed her the towel. Then Betty brought her the candies. For a moment, everything felt normal again, like maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Candy paused, glancing around the room. Where are my sunglasses? She looked down, then up, and when she finally met Betty's gaze again, she saw it. Pain, anguish. Candy's heart squeezed in her chest. Without thinking, she reached out and touched Betty's arm. Oh, Betty, I'm so sorry. That's when it happened. The rage erupted from Betty like a storm. Without warning, she shoved Candy hard. Then, in a blur of motion, she rushed in, the axe still clutched tightly in her hands. You can't have him. Betty's voice was a scream, raw with fury. Candy's heart pounded. Betty, this is stupid. I don't want Alan. But Betty wasn't listening. Both women lunged for the axe handle, their fingers gripping, pulling, twisting. Betty's voice dropped, low, cold. I've got to kill you. And then she started jerking the axe away from Candy's grasp. Candy held on tight, her breath ragged. Betty wrenched the axe up and she slashed Candy's forehead. A hot sting of pain shot through Candy's skull. Blood dripped down her face. Candy stumbled, staring at the crimson streak on her fingers. Betty, what are you doing? Stop, please. But Betty was already moving again. Candy saw the axe rising. She jumped back, her body twisting towards the utility room door. The blade came crashing down. It missed, hitting the linoleum with a dull thud. Candy screamed. The axe bounced, the momentum sending it back up and slicing Candy's toe. Pain shot through her foot, sharp and electric. Her eyes snapped to Betty. She wasn't stopping. Candy lunged for the axe. Her hands gripped the blade, ignoring the sting of metal against her palms. Something inside her snapped. She was mad now. This was insane. Candy tried to rip the axe away, but Betty kicked her, shoving her backwards. Betty bent down and sank her teeth into Candy's knuckle. Candy screamed, pain blurring her vision, white hot and blinding. But that slight shift in Betty's stance, that moment of distraction, was what Candy needed. Candy ripped the axe free. Betty stumbled off balance. Candy raised the axe and brought it down hard. The first strike hit Betty's head. She dropped to one knee, stunned, but she didn't stop. She kept trying to get up. She kept coming at Candy. Betty forced herself up, blocking Candy's path to the door. Candy tried to run, but Betty slammed her body against the door, shoving it closed, her fingers tightening around the axe. Candy's breath came in shaky sobs. Betty, please, let me go. Betty's expression hardened. Her voice was still. I can't. They fought for the axe again. Candy reached for the doorknob, twisting, pulling. Betty wrenched it back, shoving Candy down to the floor. The axe rose again. Candy shoved her hard and tried one last time to get out, but the handle wouldn't turn. Tears blurred Candy's vision. Betty, please let me go. I don't want him. I don't want him. Betty's eyes flickered. Something changed, and then she did something strange. She put her finger to her lips and hushed her. Shh. That was it. Candy's rage exploded. She grabbed the axe and shoved the handle into Betty's thigh. Betty stumbled but got back up instantly and ran at Candy again. Candy panicked. The axe was up. Betty rushed forward. So imagine that Candy's holding the axe up and Betty rushes at her right where the blade is. Her forehead met the blade, the sound a sickening crack like a coconut splitting open.
Ugh.
Betty staggered, her hands flailing, grabbing for Candy, but she wouldn't stop. She kept coming over and over, so Candy kept swinging. Betty sat down, body trembling, but she was still reaching for Candy, still trying. And Candy couldn't stop swinging. Betty wasn't stopping, so neither did she. One of the final blows sent Betty crashing to the floor. She was gone. But Candy kept chopping. A dozen more times. Her vision was red. The rage she had buried for so long. Betty Gore had ruined everything. And in that moment, Candy Montgomery let it all out. The axe dropped from her hands. Silence filled the utility room. Candy Montgomery stood over Betty Gore's body, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out everything else. Then a wave of dread crashed over her. Her stomach twisted. The fear came rushing in. She ran to the bathroom and threw up. The world blurred around her. She stumbled into the shower, turning the water on full blast. The hot spray stung her skin, and that's when she noticed blood everywhere. It clung to her arms, her legs, her face. It was in her hair, under her nails, in the creases of her skin. She scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, but no matter how much she washed, she still felt dirty. She stepped out, water dripping onto the tile floor, and then she saw it, the mess, the blood on the linoleum. It was everywhere. It was too much. She grabbed a towel and tried to clean it up, but it wouldn't come off. She wiped the freezer, blood smeared across the surface, but wouldn't disappear. The harder she scrubbed, the more it spread. Candy's breathing grew ragged. There's too much. She couldn't clean this much blood. She couldn't erase it. She forced herself to stop and to think. Her hands shook as she walked through the house. She took the dogs. Princess and Cheeto wagged their tails, oblivious. She closed the curtains, shutting out the world. She told herself, be normal. Act normal. But the truth was pounding in her skull. She had just killed someone. There was no going back, no undoing it. Then something shifted. A thought cut through the panic. The children. They had a show at 11. The movie tonight. The swimming lesson this afternoon. The thing she was supposed to be doing right now. She latched onto it. One thing at a time. That's what she had to do. Just one thing at a time.
Oh, that testimony is just harrowing.
Mhm. Yeah. I think we're all sitting on the edge of our chairs.
Yeah. That whole scene is just wild.
That's how that was what Candy testified. That was what she said.
Yep.
Oh, that would be so scary.
It would be fighting for your life like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fear of, you just ruined my life. Am I going to prison now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Candy walked to her car. Her legs were heavy, her mind buzzing. Then a sharp pain shot through her foot, her toe. She looked down. Blood seeped from the deep gash where the axe had cut her. She stared at it as if only now realizing she was injured. Then she looked at her watch. It had stopped, just like everything else inside that house. I think her watch stopped when she got in the shower.
That's what I was just thinking.
10:15. Yep.
So that's why she was wearing the same clothes, probably. Because she probably just climbed. Maybe she could have changed and people don't remember. But if she just climbed in the shower and rinsed everything off. But
she had mentioned that that she had the thought, it was lucky I'm wearing a maroon shirt. She did change her jeans, but to very similar.
Yeah.
And she changed her shoes.
Okay.
So she was wearing flip-flops when she went over and came back wearing sneakers.
Mm-hmm.
Candy got in the car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. Her breath slowed. Her mind hardened. No one must ever know. No one can know. And with that, Candy Montgomery drove away, leaving Betty Gore's body behind her. The courtroom was silent. A silence so thick it felt heavy. All eyes were on Candy Montgomery, sitting at the witness stand. Betty Gore's father, Bob, sat in the gallery watching her, studying her face, waiting for the anger to come. But it never did. He couldn't summon it. Don Crowder took a step forward. Candy, after this happened, where did you go? To the church. Did you tell anyone? No. What did you do? Candy swallowed hard. I tried to eat. Eat? I needed to be normal. The words hung in the air. Normal. Like she hadn't just killed a woman with an axe. Then Dawn asked, tell the jury you're not happy this happened, are you? Candy's voice shook. No, of course not. You feel anger, right? Yes, I'm so mad. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. It caused me to lose everything important to me. Dawn nodded, then the shift. But you had an affair with her husband. Candy flinched. Yes, but it was over. But you had an affair with her husband and you put her in that position, didn't you? Candy looked away. The jury was watching closely now. Then the moment of truth. But you killed her, didn't you? Dawn held up the axe. With this axe. Candy's body stiffened. Her breath came faster. Don't make me look at it, she whispered. Dawn stepped closer, the axe still in his hands. You killed her, Candy. Her voice crumpled. No, please, she pleaded. Then she screamed, a raw, piercing wail that could be heard rooms away. The courtroom sat frozen. Candy admitted her lies, how she hid everything. She confessed to what she had done. Then the prosecutor stepped forward. Let's go through this again. And Candy did, every detail, the same story, word for word. This time she even added in extra details, like the peppermints were in a bowl on the fireplace. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. Do you think anyone would have found out? Candy's voice was small. Yes, I think people would have known. Then the prosecution went back to the affair. You had an affair with Alan Gore. Have you had any others? Objection, Dawn yelled. Overruled. The tension tightened. Answer the question, Candy. She hesitated. Was this the only affair you had? Her hands clenched in her lap. It was the first one. The prosecutor's voice was sharp. Did you have one since? A long pause, then, yes, one. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. What's his name? Candy's eyes flashed with defiance. No, I won't tell you. Objection from Dawn. Overruled. She had no choice. Candy had to say the name, and then she had to spell it out. The prosecutor let it hang in the air for a moment, and then suddenly he dropped it. Just like that.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's
Maybe he was hoping it was one of their other friends or
oh, that's true.
something.
Hoping for something that
Yeah.
it wasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, if Betty had just found out or, but if anything, it proves that, that affair had been long ago. She had moved on. He had moved on. It
Mhm.
doesn't seem in his best interest to be asking that.
Mm-hmm.
No, it does not. I don't understand why he brought that up.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe to paint her like as a liar or
Mm-hmm.
put her more in a bad picture,
Yeah.
especially with a jury full of women.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, because that doesn't make her look better.
Who are
No.
also very religious as well.
Mhm.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
And they know that she's religious.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so that paints her in a worse picture, I guess.
It
Yeah,
does.
that's true.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe that's it.
Maybe he wanted to know how many times have you done this?
Mhm.
How much of a liar are you? Are you
Right.
lying now?
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. He wasn't done with that. For the rest of the cross-examination, he was searching for cracks. The prosecutor probed her lies, her timelines, her stories. He pushed and pushed, then he stopped. It was over. The courtroom exhaled. The battle had been fought. Now the jury would decide. The trial was almost over, but for the Montgomery's marriage, the damage was about to get worse. She sat across from Pat Montgomery, her husband, the man who had stood by her, the man who had believed her, and now she had one more confession to make. Pat hadn't been in the courtroom. He hadn't heard it.
Mm.
She said, Pat, I had another affair. Pat stared at her, then slowly his face crumpled. Tears welled in his eyes. He cried and kept crying more and more, his body shaking with sobs. Candy sat there, watching him break. She had destroyed everything. Then Don Crowder walked in, his voice sharp. We're almost done. Let's not blow it now. Candy looked at him, her face blank. Don shook his head. She shouldn't have done it, Pat. But it's over. Pat wiped his face but didn't look at Candy. For the rest of the night, they barely spoke.
Do you know why he wasn't in the courtroom during her confession?
I think it was too much for him.
Maybe.
And they had the medical examiner that day,
Mm.
as well as forensics. I think it was a lot of blood.
Yeah.
Not his
Yeah.
thing, yeah. The pastor came over that night trying to help. Pat listened, but he didn't say much. The words couldn't fix anything. Meanwhile, Alan Gore didn't seem upset when his lawyer told him that they might not win this case. There was no reaction, no anger, no grief, just silence.
Just his MO.
Yeah. Pretty on par for Alan.
Totally.
So odd.
Yeah. The next day, Friday, Don called a pathologist to the stand, his testimony that the struggle had continued even after Betty was dead. The jury needed to hear this. This wasn't a calculated murder. This was chaos, frenzy. But Judge Ryan, he wasn't having it. Ryan had been a disaster of a judge since day one. Now he was openly showing his frustration. He fiddled, he rolled his eyes, and barely paid attention while the witness testified. Don interrupted to complain about the judge's reactions. The judge excused the jury. He turned to Don Crowder. No attacks on the judge in this court. And just like that, Don was held in contempt again. $100 fine, and this time he would be spending the weekend in jail, starting immediately after the trial ended for the day.
Why was he so biased?
I don't know.
Okay. That's not something that's ever been like
Mm-mm.
talked about.
Mm-mm.
Hmm.
It's weird, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're supposed to be impartial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And almost none of his decisions are.
No.
There's like 2 coming up that are helpful for the defense, but everything up until now has always been towards the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have to be on this. He could have sent it to another courtroom.
I
You know?
wonder if he, had already heard the story and he already just kind of was like, oh, yeah, she's guilty. So maybe
I'm sure.
he was like, yeah, I'll be in charge of that, you know?
Mhm.
He already had an idea what he
Mhm.
thought,
Right.
Yeah.
maybe.
Even though you're not supposed to, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what it sounds like to me. I feel like that's the only reason that he would be so biased.
Blatantly biased.
Yeah,
Right. And maybe he didn't like the defense attorney.
Yeah.
maybe.
Not sure. It doesn't sound like they had a relationship leading up till this, but
Interesting.
yeah.
When you said he excused the jury, that doesn't mean, was that just for,
It was so that he could put Dawn in contempt of court without it being
okay.
in front of the jury.
Okay. So they weren't dismissed or anything. Okay.
Right.
No,
They
he
just-
just has them go to another room so
And
he
then-
can talk with them, and then he brings them back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So he did bring them back in, and Dr. Green took the stand next. His diagnosis, a dissociative reaction, the overkill, the rage, the dozens of axe swings. It was as if Candy wasn't even in the room. She was sane enough to know what was happening, but not sane enough to stop. The prosecution tried to introduce theology, maybe to paint Candy as delusional. Judge Ryan shut it down, not allowed. Then they tried to go after marriage encounter therapy. They tried to make it seem like a cult or maybe some secret wife swapping group, but again, not allowed. Pat Montgomery took the stand. He spoke about his wife, how sweet she was, how he found the letter from Alan Gore. Then came a strange question. Do you have any toy guns in the house? Pat's brow furrowed. No? The question hung in the air. The defense was trying to show that Candy had no violent bones in her body. As soon as court adjourned for the day, Don Crowder was arrested. The judge refused his appeal. He was going to jail for the weekend. But Don wasn't out of tricks. He found someone who could get him out through habeas corpus. The process took time. In the meantime, the weekend was long and hard for Candy. The next blow, a newspaper article hit stands. In it, a brutal revelation. The people watching the trial didn't believe Candy. She had taken the stand, she had told her story, and they didn't buy it. The same weekend, Candy was sent for a court-appointed psychiatric evaluation. It took just 15 minutes, and the conclusion? She was more than competent to stand trial. The weight of it all pressed down on Candy. She had confessed everything. But was it enough? Would the jury believe her? The public didn't.
I feel like that's really hard too, that she continued to attack her. What'd they say, 12 blows after
Mhm.
she already was dead?
Yeah.
That's
That's a hard
That's a
one
lot.
to get by. Yeah.
yeah.
I do see, though, if it is true and Betty kept coming at her even after she first started swinging, you might just
Maybe.
like freak out and just, I have to make sure this person stays down.
Maybe.
But I don't know.
She
It
didn't
does
have
seem like a lot.
weapon. Yeah, she
Yeah.
didn't have a weapon.
Yeah.
When she was down, you think you would, I don't know.
You would hope. Yeah.
You would hope that you would kind of pause and then like
Mhm.
throw it down and run or something.
But
Just
if
get out of
you
the
do
house.
look at what he said, dissociating, she
Mhm.
probably didn't realize she was down and realize that she was already dead.
And like
Maybe.
down, right?
Yeah.
Not going to get back up again.
I feel like it's kind of those animal instincts take over
Mhm.
and,
I could
you're not fully aware. If they are going with dissociating, then
Mhm.
she's not fully aware of what she's doing or what's going on.
Yeah, I could see that being why the public doesn't like her and doesn't
Yeah.
believe her story, though.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That she kept attacking her after she was dead.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that many hits, chopping her with an axe.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Brutal. Oh, that'd be so awful.
Yeah.
Once the weekend was over, we got to Monday morning, and Dr. Fred Faison took the stand. The final week of the trial was beginning. From the moment he started speaking, the jury was hooked. So this was our doctor that she went and saw that did hypnosis. Dr. Faison had spent 20 hours with Candy Montgomery. He had studied her, listened to her, peeled back the layers of her carefully constructed image, and now he was here to explain why she snapped. Candy Montgomery didn't just wake up one day and decide to kill Betty Gore, Dr. Faison told the jury. This was something that had been building in her for years. A dissociative reaction, a blind, uncontrollable rage had taken over Candy, and it hadn't started in the utility room that day. It had started before she was even 6 years old. Dr. Faison walked the jury through Candy's hypnosis sessions, through the memories that surfaced, and then he told them about the shh, that tiny, almost insignificant moment from Candy's childhood. The moment she lost her race, felt her anger boiling over, and when she threw a jar in frustration and had cuts and was taken to the hospital, Candy was feeling pain and anger, and instead of comforting her, her mother shushed her, silenced her, taught her that she had to hide her emotions, to suppress them, to bury them so deep no one would ever see. Candy had spent her whole life desperately trying to be what people expected of her. Faison explained she buried her rage so well that she didn't even know it was there anymore, but the hostilities had built up for years. And then, when Betty Gore shushed her that day in the utility room, the dam broke. The rage Candy had been suppressing since childhood came flooding out. A blind, uncontrollable explosion. Candy sat stiffly at the defense table. She looked ashamed. She never would have shared these things on her own, but now it was all out in the open. She was, in a way, pleading both self-defense and kind of insanity at the same time. The argument was simple. Candy didn't plan to kill Betty, but when the rage took over, both from Betty continuing to come at her and not letting her leave, and then shushing her, she couldn't stop herself. She wasn't in control. She was blinded by something bigger than herself. Now, like so many defense attorneys do, it was time to turn the focus to Betty. Don Crowder was almost done, but before he rested his case, he had one more thing to do. He needed the jury to see Betty differently. A former coworker of Betty's took the stand. She described Betty as harsh, tactless, a strict disciplinarian with no patience. She had made mean comments. She had snapped at students. Parents didn't like her. Then he called on a fellow church member who did not care for Betty. She told them about how she had given Betty a baby shower gift. Betty had opened it, looked at it for a split second, asked what it was. It was just something for the baby to sleep in. Made a face, put it back in the bag, and walked away without another word. Next, Don brought in a woman of similar height and weight to Betty. The jury watched as she lifted an axe, showing just how strong Betty was. The implication was clear. Betty wasn't weak. She wasn't defenseless. She was taller and bigger than Candy. If she had gone after Candy first, then maybe, just maybe, Candy really had been fighting for her life. Then they called Ron Adams, the pastor, to the stand. Ron was nervous, and for good reason, because he knew things he had been told in confidence, things the prosecution wanted to make him say out loud. First, Don had him describe Betty.
Wait, the prosecution?
Or the defense?
The prosecution.
Oh, they wanted him to say it?
They're going to try to make him say what he knew and what Candy had told him.
Okay.
And Don is not going to do that.
Oh, okay.
But Don gets to ask him first. Yeah. No.
Because the defense has been calling the other ones, right?
Yes. And the defense called Ron as well. Mm-hmm. But he's nervous for when the prosecution cross-examines him.
Okay.
Oh, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Don had him describe Betty, and Ron didn't hold back. He told the jury about the mean things Betty had said, about her bitter, cutting remarks, about how she wasn't the sweet, innocent victim everyone wanted to believe she was. Then, when it was the prosecution's turn, came the big question. Did Candy Montgomery ever tell you she killed Betty Gore? Ron froze. Then quietly he said, I refuse to answer that question, citing priest privilege. The courtroom held its breath, and then, you guys can guess, Judge Ryan leaned forward. You'll answer the question, Mr. Adams. And just like that, the privilege was gone. Later that day, something unexpected happened. Dawn requested that the jury be allowed to hear Candy's polygraph results. The prosecutor had no objections. Judge Ryan, however, wasn't sure. "I need the night to consider it," he said. It was strange. Polygraphs usually weren't admissible evidence. Then the next morning, Judge Ryan allowed it. The irony is that it helped Candy's case. Candy had passed the polygraph test, including answering questions about if she meant to kill Betty. Did she go there to kill Betty? The defense was done after this. The prosecution was left with their final rebuttals, and soon it would be in the jury's hands. The prosecutor called Joanne, a friend of Betty Gore's. She took the stand and spoke about Betty's kindness, how she had been a good mother, a loving wife, a gentle person, not moody or harsh like the defense had painted her to be. Dawn Crowder stepped up for cross-examination. Was Betty a moody person? No. You didn't say that before? No. No highs and lows, no mood swings? Nope. Joanne held her ground. She wasn't giving the defense anything. The jury's faces, they were unreadable. Judge Ryan made one ruling in Candy's favor. He declared a tape recording inadmissible, a tape where Candy had snapped at a reporter, "I hope you fall." He was trying to take her picture up close, and there were all these tree branches, and he kind of tripped over one, and she was being recorded, and she said, "I hope you fall."
I'd be annoyed by reporters too.
Yeah, especially if they're asking questions. You can only imagine what they're trying to get for sound bites, right?
Yeah.
The prosecutor brought in one last quote-unquote expert, a doctor who had never even met Candy Montgomery. His entire testimony that Candy did not have dissociative disorder, that she was in control of her actions, and this had nothing to do with a buried trauma from childhood playing out in a blind rage. This was murder, and Candy Montgomery should pay for it.
Some guy who she's never met before?
Yeah,
Okay.
it did not hold a lot of weight with the jury.
Yeah, that's an expert.
Mm-hmm. It seems so wrong to comment on someone's any sort of mental state or a diagnosis without even speaking to them.
Yeah.
Closing arguments were next. The prosecutor felt like he was on fire. This was his moment and his last chance to convince the jury. He walked them through everything, every witness, every testimony, perceived holes in Candy's story. Then he focused on the overkill, 41 axe blows, some of them after Betty was already dead. If this was self-defense, why did Candy keep swinging? And then a final point. Other weapons were easier. A knife in the kitchen, scissors in the house. If this was just about survival, why use an axe? In my mind, it's like she's going to go get a different weapon when Betty's swinging an axe at her.
That's what was there. That's what was available.
Yeah.
That's what was being used to cut her in multiple places.
Yeah. She
Yeah.
was trying to get the axe from her and then got it and then used it. Like, it's not like she's like, oh, she's coming at me. Let me run and find a
See, I think
butcher
that
knife.
closing argument proves the defense's case.
Yeah, it
Because
does.
there are easier weapons, right?
If it was premeditated, then yeah, she could have grabbed a knife from the kitchen on her way in.
And Betty was also blocking the door anyway. Like she was trapped in
Yeah.
there.
Like
Yeah.
what?
She
could
closed
she
it
have
at least
grabbed?
twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the prosecutor talked about Betty Gore, her life, her fear in those last moments, her helplessness as Candy kept swinging. Then he rested his case. Now is the defense's turn. Don Crowder knew the biggest problem was the overkill, so he went straight at it. Yes, there are things about this case that still bother you. I understand that. But let's not forget what happened before the axe was in Candy's hands. Betty came at Candy. Betty was an animal ready to attack. Then Don did something unexpected. He quoted John Steinbeck. He said, "There are those among us who live in rooms of experience that you and I cannot enter. If you're worried about whether Candy Montgomery will suffer, don't. She already does. She lives in that room of experience and will for the rest of her life. That room is similar to a jail cell." He then reminded them of everything Candy had lost, their home, their money, their reputation, and then he made his final plea. You have the opportunity to keep this family together. Don't rob children of their mother. Don't rob a husband of his wife. Conviction is not an appropriate solution to this tragedy. The state has not proved its case. Reasonable doubt exists. The prosecutor got one more chance. He said just one thing. Betty Gore is not here to tell her side of the story. He paused, let that sink in. Then, Candy Montgomery is a good liar. Her friends, even her husband, never knew. She hid multiple affairs. And now she wants you to believe this was because of something that happened when she was 4? That's ridiculous. And now the verdict was coming. Just like that, it was out of the defense and the prosecutor's hands. The jury was about to decide Candy Montgomery's fate. Would they see a terrified woman fighting for her life or a cold-blooded killer who got away with murder? The defense team felt like they had done everything they could. It was over. Dawn turned to Rob. That's it. There was nothing left to argue, no more witnesses, no more chances. That afternoon, Dawn spoke to Pat Montgomery. No matter what happens, you and Candy are going to need to move. Pat nodded but said nothing. He already knew. Then a death threat came in, one for Dawn Crowder and one for Candy Montgomery. The hatred was real. People were angry. If Candy walked free, it wouldn't just be a legal victory. It could be a war zone. By that same afternoon, the jury had reached a verdict. It was fast, faster than anyone expected.
That
A
is
verdict?
fast. How many hours?
Like 3?
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A verdict this quickly, that could mean only one of two things. Either they didn't believe Candy's story at all, or they believed her completely. There was no in between. The courtroom filled, the tension was thick. 20 police officers lined up between the spectators and the lawyers' tables. They weren't taking any chances. If this verdict set people off, they needed to be ready. Judge Tom Ryan entered, taking his seat. He looked at the lawyers. Would you permit the verdict reading to be televised? Neither the prosecution nor the defense objected. This was going to be public. Judge Ryan took a breath, then he addressed the packed courtroom. When I read the verdict, I want no reaction. No physical, no vocal. Do I make myself clear?
Okay.
Yeah. The room was silent. Then he said, bring in the jury. Candy Montgomery sat frozen at the defense table. Beside her, Don kept his eyes on the juror's face, searching for any sign, but their expression gave nothing away. Judge Ryan said, has the jury reached a verdict? The jury foreman stood up, Bob Snyder, a man who had led corporate security at EDS. A man used to being calm under pressure. Yes, Your Honor, we have. He handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to Judge Ryan. A pause, then Judge Ryan looked out over the courtroom and read the words on the paper. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. The room was motionless. No one spoke. No one moved. It took a second for the words to sink in.
Wow.
Then the jury raised their hands, every single one of them. They all agreed. Candy Montgomery was free. Pat Montgomery, not caring about the judge's orders, rushed forward, pushed through the crowd, reached his wife, and Candy collapsed into his arms. Tears streamed down her face. The trial was over. She had survived. But as they left the courthouse, it became clear not everyone agreed with the verdict. Outside, people screamed, "Murderer!" and "You killed her." The anger was palpable. The hatred was real. Candy lowered her head, her breath shallow. She was afraid for her life. She had been acquitted in court, but she would never be free. Not from the whispers, not from the stares, not from the legacy of Betty Gore's murder.
Yeah, I mean, you have the court, and then, they always say the court of public opinion, too.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with how prevalent that was in that community. Like, I mean, there's no way they could stay there.
Yeah.
That's really sad, if it all did play out as she said.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really, she had to fight for her life, and she's still now, it ruined her life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really sad.
And it wasn't just
Sad for everybody all
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. And it wasn't just where they were. It was all around the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the price of walking free. Candy Montgomery was not guilty in the eyes of the law, but like you said, the court of public opinion, that was a different story. Let's go inside the jury room. When the jury door closed, there was an immediate sense of dread. They feared they would be stuck there for days, debating, arguing, locked in a room with no way out until they reached a mutual decision. The jury foreman, Bob Snyder, stood up. His voice was calm, firm, in control. We can't let the affair affect this. Everyone seemed to agree. He looked around the room, and we're not going to focus on the overkill. Again, nods and agreement. That shifted everything. The affair was off the table. The brutal 41 axe swings off the table. They only had one job now. Was this murder or was it self-defense? The first vote was taken. 3 jurors voted guilty. 9 voted not guilty. The ones still on the fence, they weren't sure why Candy hadn't run out of the house, and more than anything, they couldn't understand how she left the baby behind. But then they considered something else. Candy Montgomery had been under unimaginable stress. The fight, the blood, the terror. Could she have forgotten Betty Gore was there? It seemed possible. But why hadn't she just run away? One juror put it simply, sometimes you don't have control over that. They took a second vote, and this time all 12 jurors voted not guilty on murder. They weren't done yet. They had to consider manslaughter. The first vote, 6 guilty, 6 not guilty. Split decision, so they kept talking, going over the evidence again, trying to make sense of it all. The sunglasses could have been knocked off in the struggle. The blood made it hard to tell what had happened and in what order. And then they came back to the baby again. The next vote, 4 guilty, 8 not guilty. Voted again, 2 guilty, 10 not guilty. Finally, they took a vote, 1 guilty, 11 not guilty. It was down to one person, and no one wanted to pressure them. So they tried something different. Each juror was asked to write down any remaining questions they had. If they had no more doubts, they were supposed to just scribble on the paper. Bob Snyder went through them one by one, then he stopped. On one of the last papers, someone had written, I have resolved my question. I will vote for acquittal. It was done. The jury had reached their verdict. The jurors stood up. They were ready. But then the bailiff opened the door, and suddenly their confidence wavered. They could hear it, the hum of voices, the buzz of anticipation, the crowd waiting outside. And the weight of what they had just decided sunk in. They knew the verdict would be unpopular, and they did not feel safe. They made a special request. Can we get assistance to our cars? None of them wanted to walk out alone. They didn't feel safe until every single one of them was driving away. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the realization hit them. No one believed Candy Montgomery was innocent. No one but them.
That's so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, I mean, if they're not in the courtroom, they maybe don't get everything. But, I mean, that would be really scary.
Yeah.
It would.
Well, and to hear her story, that changes things.
And
And so if you didn't hear that
Mm-hmm.
and you had just heard,
Yeah.
they said she killed her.
Because all you're getting is journalists' notes
Mm-hmm.
that they're writing into articles. They didn't televise it.
Yeah.
They didn't record it at all except for reading the verdict.
Well, and
Yeah.
especially she said the story twice in a row. Same details,
Mm-hmm.
same story.
Same emotion, same
Yes.
expression. Yeah.
And I mean, either she's telling the truth or that is very well rehearsed.
Yeah.
Mhm. You know, it's an interesting thing. They ask people they think are lying to tell their story backwards
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
because you memorize it and practice it. Not you, but someone that's
Right.
lying in the order that you're going to tell it. And
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
they'll have them walk through the other way
Yeah.
and get their reaction, or if they miss things,
Mm,
Oh, that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
smart.
use that on your kids. No, I'm just kidding.
Right?
Your employees, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm going to remember that one.
Yeah. The public was outraged. The hatred was immediate. It spread like wildfire. People were furious. Life would never be normal again for Candy Montgomery. Women seemed outraged about the affair. People wrote letters. The hate mail started flooding in just 2 days after the trial. Most of it came from Christians. One letter stood out, a single phrase repeated over and over again. Shh, shh. Over and over, hundreds of times. Candy read it and she knew exactly what it meant.
That's awful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like so much hate mail to both her and the lawyer.
Yeah.
Dawn got a poem titled Candy is Bad for Your Health. The first part says, Candy Montgomery was a whore. She screwed around with Alan Gore. When Betty Gore brought it up, Candy used an axe to cut her up. In Collins County, murder is okay if you go to church and pray. And don't worry, adultery is cool if you teach Sunday school. There were 12 more lines similar,
Wow.
and it was widely circulated in the media. So they sent a copy to Dawn, and they sent a copy to the media. Pat was angered by the coverage and considered suing the news outlets.
Yeah.
By November 5th, 8 days after the verdict, the Montgomerys had made the decision to move. On Halloween, which was only 3 days after the trial, there was a big costume party in Dallas, people drinking, laughing, celebrating the holiday. And then 3 separate women walked in, dressed as Candy Montgomery, each of them holding a plastic axe. The message, brutal. Candy was a joke, a costume. Her story was entertainment, and she was the most hated woman in Texas. Freedom had come with a cost. While she had won her case, she had lost her life as she knew it.
I mean, her life is still entertainment. I mean, I talked about it at the beginning, the first episode. There's 2 series that came out within the last 5 years about this.
Candy changed her name.
Yeah.
Her and her husband moved to Georgia. They are now divorced. But that's all I know about her since then.
I think I saw he got remarried.
Mm.
Did you Google?
Yes.
Laura.
I've been trying so hard not to. I want to watch those series that you told us about, but I'm like, I'll wait until we finish this for sure. But
Yeah.
I definitely want to watch it.
Yeah, I do too. I was waiting to just to make sure that if there were any facts that were different, they didn't affect my memory of
Or
all
even
the
just
research.
dramatized.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
Doesn't look like she got remarried, but
Mm.
I Googled because I wanted to see what she looked like.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to see her
Sure.
picture. And of course, the first thing that comes up.
Was the
Was-
verdict.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's pretty shocking. But again, we weren't even in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like, at least for me, like I kind of have an idea already in my head until you get to the trial and like hear her actually tell her
Mhm.
side of things,
Yeah. That's how I felt too. I was pretty sure she did it on purpose. And then as soon as you told us her confession, I was like, oh, maybe not. Doesn't
Yeah.
sound like that.
Yeah. And that, it was buried so deep down where they only got to it with hypnosis.
Yep.
You're not going to lie under hypnosis.
No.
And I think she told that story multiple times while under hypnosis with every single detail the same.
Yeah.
I mean, where they like poked her or made her feel cold,
Mm-hmm.
showing that she really was under.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the case of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore. It's a wild one.
Oh, it totally is.
It's really wild. That was really interesting, though.
Mm-hmm.
I found it really fascinating. The book was great. Everything that I read on it was really interesting.
Mhm.
So we'll link those in our blog, which you can get to by going to our website, crimeclueless.com, checking under the contributors section. Also, we would love if you would let us know what you think.
Mhm.
And have you watched the series? Do they match up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did see that is it the newer one? Love, what is it?
Love and Death.
Love and Death. I think I saw that one checks more boxes on
Mm-hmm.
being more accurate.
That's the one on Max, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other one
what I
is on
read.
Hulu.
Mhm.
That one's called Candy.
With
Okay.
Jessica Biel.
Yeah. Jessica Biel plays Candy.
I think I read that one shows like the emotions and the feelings and things like that more. But to
Fun.
get to that, it's a little more dramatized.
And Jessica Biel, I think she looks more like Candy did.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
What's her name? Olsen?
Elizabeth Olsen.
Elizabeth. Yeah. She's really pretty. And I did watch the beginning of the first one on Max,
Mhm.
and she did a good job.
Yeah, I had seen Candy when that one first came out, and then when the other series came out, I wanted to kind of see how they're different. They're both really good.
Do you remember any key differences? I know it's been years since you watched them.
Oof. Not really. I feel like Candy, from what I remember, I feel like it did a pretty good job of going through everything, like you said. I don't know. It's just there's a scene in there where it does like show the attack.
Wow.
And so that's kind of, I mean, it's interesting to see. It's not as, I think, in depth as that, just because it is like a show that's on Hulu. But yeah, it kind of left me, even after watching that, it still felt like you're questioning whether or not it was self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Like, I feel like us talking about it and going through the facts and everything makes me more on the side that it was self-defense, whereas the series, it was still like, I don't know.
Interesting. I wonder if that was on purpose or just
Maybe.
to get more reaction when the verdict is read, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
So,
we'll all watch it and
Yeah.
then we'll record a follow-up.
yes.
Well, any other final thoughts or anything?
I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time still, I think.
I know. I want to watch the series now that we finished, and
Yeah, let's all do, and
we can talk about it.
we'll have a
Report
bonus
back.
episode. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and listening. We would love to hear what you think. You can send us an email, crimeclueless@gmail.com, or on any of the social media platforms, search for @crimeclueless. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love if you would take a minute to rate, review, and share our podcast. It really helps grow our amazing community. You can find episodes of Crime Clueless on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, iHeart, and all major streaming platforms. If you have any true crime or hometown spooky stories, we would love to feature them on a future episode. You can email them to us. Our email address is crimeclueless@gmail.com. And remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.